So let's jump in today. So, how do PMOs drive value? We're really excited today that you guys are welcoming us into your homes and your offices and letting us talk to you for an hour. We have a really exciting guest today. Cloud, he's founder of OptiGold PMO. He'll be introducing himself in a minute. But, this is a big topic for a lot of people because PMOs, it can be a touchy subject. We know we're project managers, we know we're program managers, but not everyone loves us. Sometimes we're all bureaucracy and governance. So how do we show our value? So that's why we're so excited to introduce Noah today, because he's been in the field for over 20 years, experiencing guiding portfolios and programs and PMOs across all different industries. He has expertise in connecting strategy to delivery, helping PMOs evolve from just administrative functions into really just strategic engines that drive business impact. So without further ado, I'm going to let him introduce himself for a minute, and then we're going to dive into the meat of the topic.
Great setup, Elizabeth. That was well done. So why did I found OptiGold PMO? Besides the great things that Elizabeth mentioned, I recognize that the world is evolving and moving into a place where there is a better way to build, elevate, optimize PMOs, project management offices. And I also realized that they're pain points for so many organizations, and they were pain points for me. And while there were some good, respectable resources to understand the best ways to build a strong project management office in your organization, there's so many more now. And I want to be part of that journey to help others and pave the way for others so that it's a lot easier to learn and comprehend and grow in this space and help organizations become strategic with their PMO thinking than I had back when I was going through my career. So that to me is my why. I wanted to build something that would solve problems for organizations, particularly within the lens of their PMOs. That's the nutshell.
Perfect.
Yep.
So let's get started then.
Yeah. Let's jump in.
Tell me a little bit more about what a PMO is and what are the facets it entails.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a great one to ground our audience with. So in a traditional sense, I'm assuming a lot of your audience have maybe hopefully heard of a PMO, but let's pretend that, from the basic standpoint, in a simple sense, it originally started as just a project management office. Like that term PMO was coined as a project management office. And there's a lot of history that goes back to the 1950s, which you don't need to get into. That's a whole podcast in itself. But today, that has evolved into different meanings for the P in PMO, right? So you have project management offices still, but you also have portfolio management offices. You've got program management offices. There's SRO, strategy realization offices. So what I tell people in this regard is it's sort of the mission control for projects in your organization from a PMO standpoint, right? Mm-hmm. When they're at their best, they're selecting projects that are tied to strategy. They're optimizing resources and aligning resources the right way. They're keeping the returns and the measurables on the forefront, the things that move the needle, the value that moves the needle. And in the most simple term, they're controlling chaos. If you don't have a PMO and you're a growing organization, or you're an organization that's doing a lot of capital work or just trying to keep the lights on, having a PMO in place that even is 50% efficient is better than not having a PMO at all. And so I would also say one more thing as well, that there's also different levels of PMOs. And I would say that the most important thing is not to focus on what the P stands for in PMO, because you'll get a bunch of different answers. Focus on where does the PMO sit? What is its purpose? And what authority does it have in the organization? If you focus there and take the acronym out of it, you'll start to better understand your PMO.
Okay, so that's important. Is there different levels but what about the facets? What are the elements of a PMO?
Yeah, so usually it's a great question. Usually the PMO is going to offer different services at different levels to the organization, right? So at first, if a PMO is sitting at the enterprise level, it's already positioned itself to potentially be strategic, because then you have a better view and a better picture of the organization from a strategic standpoint. So it brings a lot of those strategic elements. But it can also sit at a business unit level, like an IT department, like an IT PMO or a marketing PMO. And then sometimes there's one-off PMOs, like there's a program that gets stood up and you put a specific tactical or operational PMO on top of it. And it exists to help support processes, tools, methodologies, support the PMs, staff the PMs to projects. So it's really a blended mix of services between strategic delivery, operational activity, and tactical activity.
So what do you think is the value of a PMO? Because a lot of people, and I said it when we introed, right? People don't necessarily see the value of the PMO. People don't
Yeah.
even realize that, they might not even see the value of project managers until they get a really good, strong PMO, right? They get a really strong project managers. They never realize what they're missing, right? So what is the value? How do we show our value to actually make people realize what is so important? Because you've mentioned strategic, you've mentioned business and tactical, but you haven't actually said what that means to the business or what that is.
Yeah. So I would almost, PMOs are commonly perceived as red tape and process police, right? We talk a lot about that on LinkedIn. We have great dialogue about that offline. And the challenges, I think, that happen in organizations, these PMOs a lot of times focus on process more than outcomes and delivery, right? So if you have too much process and too many steps, or your metrics are not tracking the right information, you're not tracking organizational performance, and you're not tracking benefits realization, then your PMO is going to look as if it's not supporting the organization the way that most organizations need. And they also typically have too much reporting, and that reporting is capturing too much data and not reporting effectively, right? So the good PMOs understand that it's a strategic mindset and it's a customer focused mindset, that you put the customer in the forefront, meaning the organization in the forefront of your PMO, and keep them in mind and what their needs are. You have to build a PMO that's effective and meets the needs of the customers. And that story could be different for a CIO than it could be for a business leader. Metrics, think about it from a business leader standpoint. You're going to be concerned when you're communicating with the customer and you're a leader of a PMO, your operations and teams are going to be focused on speed to market. Do we have bottlenecks in our process? Are we bringing a positive customer experience? Your CIO is going to be worried about different things than that. They're going to be concerned about, do I have the capacity to do the work that it's being asked of my teams? Am I managing risk and data security, right? So if your PMO is static and it's only focused on process and reporting, and you're not thinking from a strategic mindset when you connect with your customers, then you're going to have a bad reputation in your organization, plain and simple.
So let's talk through a few things that you've said so far, which is the elements of a PMO: intake, prioritization, standardization, risk and issue management, resource allocation, and benefits and communication. Of those 5, which of those do you think is the hardest for PMOs to maintain, and why?
Yeah, first of all, I think intake is, even though I feel that intake is, if you're going to start anywhere, start with people and start with intake, because that process sets you up for success down the line. If you got intake, you at least have strategic visibility.
What does that look like though, Noah? Can you clarify for our audience, why is intake so important? Like, if we're building a PMO from scratch, right?
Yeah.
And we know we can't put in 1,000 processes until we have shared terminology, some standardization. Why are you saying that strategic intake is the most important piece that you have to put into a PMO?
Yeah, and Justin answered. So yes, Elizabeth, I'll answer that. And to answer your question, Justin, I also think it can be very difficult as well. So you have to master that and climb that hill. So I think that intake is critically important when you're building a PMO, or you're trying to elevate your PMO to a place to where it is seen as a strategic partner. And the reason for that is the organization is running and they have lots of projects that they want to do. They have lots of opportunity to grow their business, and all of those resources are bringing ideas to the table and trying to get projects stood up and resources and funding around those projects, right? So if you don't have a good intake process and you don't have strong governance and decision makers around the projects that everyone wants to do in your organization, then the pet projects will make it through and they'll get staffed, and you run the risk of not focusing on the right projects with the right people at the right time. And so having a strong,
the governance piece that you're talking about, commonly we know about return on investment or some other metrics. Can you expand a little bit more on what the prioritization drivers are for intake?
Yeah, what do you look at when what is part of that intake process? What are we actually intaking? What data points are you looking for?
Yeah, so, if a business is prioritizing speed to market, and they're going to, not worry so much necessarily about what there's, you have to have guardrails on spending, cost, your risk, staying on top of those things. But if you're prioritizing speed to market, you're gonna be able to start sort of step back and look from the lens of, okay, we want to prioritize speed to market. So we're going to be a little bit looser with our governance on how much we spend and focus on getting this to market, even if it's not perfect, right? So when you're going through intake and evaluating from that lens, you're not going to emphasize as much on here's how much it costs. I mean, you definitely want to have guardrails, but you're going to emphasize more on, okay, what is the most efficient MVP way, that minimum viable product way that we can get this to market so that we can meet the demand of our customers and improve our customer experience, right? So that's just one example. And depending on what your priorities are in your organization, maybe it's environmental, social, and governance, right? So that's a common hot topic now. Maybe you're working on projects and you want to make sure that you position your products and your organization in a way that is socially responsible, that meets ESG standards and speaks to the customers that you want to reach. You're going to prioritize decision-making around those components more than you're going to prioritize other components. So you're probably going to have some risk in there. You're going to not prioritize, metrics that aren't going to drive those outcomes.
So you bring up an important point, which is that prioritization is going to be tied towards roadmap, an organization's entire strategy, mission, and vision, as well as the departmental pieces. But that requires a seat at the table. How often do you see PMOs actually getting a seat at the table? And if they don't have one, how can they work towards that?
This is a really good question, Justin, and I'm glad you asked it. And it does sort of tie into how do we bridge the gap between strategy and execution. So there's different philosophies on this. And my philosophy is that a PMO has to earn a seat at the table. What I mean by that is, in order to earn a seat at the table and build executive trust, you have to be very clear on the services and the value that your PMO delivers, the why that PMO exists. And you continue to do that. That is not a one-time event. This is a continuous improvement, continuous customer-focused stakeholder engagement mindset. So you need to build success stories. You need to market the PMO and what it does well. You need to listen to your customers, listen to your stakeholders. Once you get to a point where you have that trust and you have a seat at the table, then you start to go along with the organization when they're going through strategic planning, right? So if an organization's defining their strategy and the PMO leaders have the authority and have the input to sit in the room and support that, you have great outcomes, right? You think about it from the lens of a PMO. You see what's coming. You know where the priorities are going to be. You can manage and allocate your resources better. There are less surprises, and it creates way less stress on your project management and your staff when you can prioritize effectively and you're with the leadership team from the ground up. So to me, supporting strategy and being in the room helps you walk with the organization and build a roadmap for strategy, which then becomes the projects and the priorities that you need. And being in that room is the most important component of that.
Okay, and that's fair. I think Srinivasa over here in the chat is asking a little bit more on the tactical side of the prioritization aspect that you're talking about.
Sure.
How do you prioritize different projects under a program?
Yeah, so a lot of that depends. So if we're speaking at the program level, right? So and just the ground, I want to make sure we ground the audience. When you have programs running, you usually have a collection of projects underneath those programs that have shared benefits and outcomes for an organization. So you group those up together because there's more efficiency to work on them that way, right? So let's make sure that our audience is grounded in that. So from a program standpoint, this is a great use case for either having a centralized PMO that the program plugs into for support and prioritization, or perhaps this is a program that is going to run for a few years and then it'll disband and they'll move on to something else. You can bolt a program PMO on top of that to help. And it's the same concept with the intake conversation that we just had. You would run, I envision like a steering committee that sits above that in the program space, and you've got sponsors and leaders who are controlling benefits and making sure that the projects that are being stood up that are coming through that program are aligned there properly, and ensure that the right questions are being asked up front. And then from there, you use data and just prioritize accordingly, right? So you can keep 4 projects active and 2 on the parking lot. You can go that route, but I think there's a tactical prioritization element that a PMO can help you with that, but it's the same as the intake conversation. It's very similar.
Okay, so let's shift gears for a second, because you did talk about demonstrating value, communicating value, and also building some sort of coalition to help drive towards that strategic impact in the PMO. But I've worked with PMOs and I've built my own PMOs in smaller projects, if you will. And one of the things that's probably the most difficult is getting people to adhere to a process. For example, updating the Jira tickets or following a particular template. How do you go about enforcing, maybe enforcing might be too strong of a word, but enforcing the PMO policies at the project level?
This is where the customer-centric ongoing mindset of listening to your customers come into play. So if you're a PMO leader and you're supporting, iterative development, and you're supporting, a handful of product development projects that are running agile, right? Or hybrid. As a leader, you've got to get out to the streets and you've got to talk to the teams, right? You're not always going to get the feedback. You have different people and different perspectives there, right? That may or may not provide that feedback. So as a PMO, it's your responsibility to get out to your organization and understand what the pain points are for your stakeholders, what the pain points are for your project teams, and start to map out themes based off the feedback that you're getting. And then from there, you have to make a decision to what you're going to do with that information.
How are you gaining information? Is it through surveys, town halls, road shows?
Yeah, and that's very culturally dependent, but normally, one of the best ways to get quick feedback that feels safe for people to provide is using, having regular surveys and getting feedback on how you feel the PMO is performing across all of its services, including updating Jira tickets if that's, updating reports. So you have to have a continuous feedback mechanism. You can do it through, surveys. You can sit down one-on-one with people if you've got critical issues. So the goal there is to ensure that you listen to your customers and stakeholders, and then decide how you can bridge, identify the problem, and then decide how you can bridge the gap to make changes either within that project or moving forward.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate here on that one. I've been in companies, and then we have a couple questions in the chat that I want to get to, but I've been in companies where they send out surveys. I don't tell the truth because I don't trust they're anonymous. So how do you gauge if you're getting accurate information?
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, look, we could go on. We won't, we'll belabor this, but I'll tell you, the culture matters, right? Like if you're at an organization that is larger, you may feel anonymous, but you don't want to put, open text data in there, then make it, radio button, make a survey where people can't necessarily enter a lot of their own personal information, but keep the answers consistent. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How do you feel about, the way that your methodologies providing service, the way the PMO is providing service to you? Like there's different ways you can build surveys to build some psychological safety in there. And that's not the only way. I mean, you can go out and talk to people too. It's hard to talk to 500 people if there's a problem impacting 100 project managers, so you have to find innovative ways to get that feedback, and you can't rely on the person who is going through that situation to provide you that feedback.
But one of the things, and this is before we get to those two questions, is I've been in the situation where PMO is hounding me for this. You're telling me that we're going to do a retrospective or a roadshow surveys, whatever, to get to improvement in the future. But right now, this second, the PMO is bugging me on something while I'm trying to resolve an existing situation. What else does the PMO do in order to address the discrepancy between the processes that should be in place and making sure that they are not impeding on the project progress?
Yeah, and that's a delicate dance, because Justin, if I were to go to a project manager or a stakeholder who felt that their project was being hampered by process and not being helped, I would have to understand from that stakeholder and maybe the sponsors say, hey, like we can make adjustments right now to help you because we still have a year left on this project and we need to change this. Or if you've got 3 months left in your project, it might become, let's get through the deliverables. We know that there's challenges here with data collection. We have an issue that we need to resolve from a PMO to make this better and scale that across the organization. So you have to decide, do you want to intervene and fix now because there's still a lot of project left to get done? Or are we towards the end of this project, for example, and we want to capture those lessons learned and increment through the process to make that better?
I could go into that, but we have to get into the comments. But man, I could go into lessons learned.
We'll start with Basavaraj.
Actually, I just want to before we do, I want to speak to what Adam mentioned because it was directly to what he said. So Adam put in 2 comments just now. The first, in regards to surveys, he said personal touch, because you had mentioned one-on-ones. I do agree that is a way, if you can read someone, right, that you can get a better idea rather than surveys, because people, like I said, I don't tell the truth in the surveys because I don't trust they're anonymous, even with radio buttons, right? He had also mentioned he mentioned you need qualitative comment or qualitative feedback, not just quantitative feedback as well. So I just wanted to raise that because that's to what you were talking about just now. And then questions.
That's Adam. Was that Adam? Yeah, that was great. Great interjection there. Absolutely. You can't just have quantitative, right? Maybe it's how likely are you to promote, the services that the PMO provides, like net promoter score. Yeah, there's definitely different satisfaction components to it. That's not just qualitative. I think that's a really good call.
Awesome. Okay, so we got a couple questions. I'll throw them on the screen. The first one's, what are the different program level, project, and team level metrics to be tracked by program management, aligning with strategy and business goals as a program manager?
A lot in there. Let me reread that. Yeah, so this is good. And I think what this user is asking is, depending on where you're at, program, project, or focusing on the team, how do you, like, what is the important things you need to track to align the work that you're doing with strategy and business goals? I'll tell you right now, this also starts with where a PMO can bring value, right? So if you're setting your project and programs up successfully, you should be defining, when projects go through intake, what are the intended benefits of that project? What are the intended outcomes of the project or program? And if you're a program manager, and I will tell you that if you get handed a project or a program that doesn't answer that question, immediately address that before you get your project started. Drive that through kickoff and make sure that question could be answered, because it will make this question that you just asked a lot easier to track.
Well, I think also though, Noah, is when we're looking at different metrics to track, and the way I've done this in the past, right? I will put in templates, or I'll make sure our tickets all have the same structure, the same field. So that way we can build reporting that uses the exact same data and we present it to the right audience at the right time. Shared terminology is really important when that comes to that. We know the hot item definition of done. If leadership doesn't know what done means, and all the teams don't know what done means because they all mean something different, it can cause chaos. So that goes to the strategy and business goals too, as well. So
and I still, so we're talking strategy. I want to make sure that we ground ourselves here too. You still want to track the tactical and operational components of your project that maybe aren't necessarily strategic too. If you're talking at a project level, you need to, especially within a program, you got to understand those dependencies across the projects, maybe dependencies that are outside of the program. You also need to, as a program manager, understand the roadmap for your program and where these projects are landing, and keep an eye and have good visibility on scope, schedule, cost for those projects in a rolled up way, to your point, Elizabeth, so that you're communicating at a roadmap level to the right audience. But as a program manager, when you step down and, step into a room with your project managers, you're going to be communicating at a different level, and you're going to want to know those tactical metrics for your projects, scope, schedule, cost, and on time. And so
do you think because you just said like on time, on budget, but do you think those are actually the right metrics to track? Because on time, on budget isn't necessarily business impact. So if PMO wants to be a strategic partner, are those the right measurements? Are we measuring, what are the right things to measure as PMO partners?
Yeah. So, and I think this gets right back into, if you're only tracking scope, schedule, cost, risk issues, dependencies, you are going to, present yourself as a tactical PMO that maybe is over-engineered at times. If you're wanting to make sure that you're tracking to strategy, it goes back to those defined benefits on what the projects are trying to achieve to move the organization forward. And again, like if it's a CFO, they're going to be focused on ROI, predictability, funding guardrails, right? Like if it's a CEO, maybe they're going to be focused on the growth of the organization or the business or the accountability. So you want to tie goals to initiatives, and and to metrics, so that you stop the low value conversations and the low value work and the low value reporting, and you start to double down on the most important things for strategy. So I know that's a light over high level answer, but that's
it's fine. It's totally fine. I think go ahead, Justin.
It's the whole concept of managing constraints does not determine success or guarantee intended business value capture.
Absolutely
harped upon in the past.
Yeah. Well, and you're right, Justin. So like if I'm a PMO or a project or a collection of projects, and my metrics are I've completed 6 projects this year, or 50 projects this year, with all due respect, who cares? Like what have you done with that work, right? Like, what has it done for the business? How have you moved your organization forward and delivered the benefits and protected the benefits that that project was delivering? Like, to me, those are needle moving conversations that are much bigger than the number of projects you delivered or how quickly you were on budget that you delivered them. Still relevant, but not as important from a strategic lens.
So with the question that we have here, I want to kind of help layer that. No, you're good. Is standardization. We've talked about shared languages and templates to help accelerate the PMO activity, as well as retain a more scalable model. So with that, Basavaraj, and I might have butchered your name, I apologize. How does the PMO create a safe space to fail experiments while balancing governance and strategic alignment?
Can we classify this as innovation? So we're starting to get into innovation topics here a little bit. Yeah. So this is a question that's really common in the industry and from leaders that I talk to is, especially now in the world of AI, which I know we'll touch on. You have to have some guardrails in place. I get it, to protect value, the money and the risk. But if you're going to do innovative learning and safe to fail experiments, you have to have a specific service offering within your PMO that maybe is not as rigorous or is using the same governance mechanisms for the rest of your organization. So you have to give them some room to breathe, right? And what that may look like is, number one, don't boil the ocean with safe to fail experiments. Pick small incremental pilots with focused testing so that you can learn from that experience and either scale or just pilot to learn, right? And then from a governance standpoint, they need room to grow and think and breathe, right? So create, a specific service offering in your PMO that is specific for safe to fail experiments, that loosens the guardrails, that gets these projects visible quickly, cuts down on process, make sure that they get through guardrails quicker than they would if they were, a project that needed heavy governance and risk oversight, so that they have room to breathe. So you can still balance your governance and strategic alignment in your organization, but create a safe space in a PMO service line and a lineage that is specifically tailored and customized to innovation work.
Well, I think it's all good and all in terms of a recommendation, but let's be real. If a PMO is sitting with the strategy and the senior leaders and you're enabling failed experiments and you're not able to communicate a potential value, or that you're just becoming a cost center, then there's the risk of becoming less known as a strategic entity.
Yeah, I mean, and this gets back to the basics of customer mindset. And when all else is failing, or when that perception is happening and you're losing stakeholder support and trust, regardless if it's because of innovation, because of its process or over engineering, you've got to get out to your customers and stakeholders and have those conversations. And you need to catch that before it, gets out of hand, is the way that I would say that, right? So if you're taking a continuous improvement mindset and you're staying connected with your organization and you're paying attention to what's happening around you and the conversations that are happening and the body language and the support in meetings, who's showing up, who's not, who's working around processes, that gives you an open opportunity to resolve that. And that boils down to engagement and relationships. You have to stay on top of those relationships so that you get that feedback, Justin, before it becomes a bigger issue and changes.
See, I don't consider safe fail experiments the PMO's ownership. I feel like there will be a dedicated team, or from a product perspective, a product owner might come in. I know someone asked for a product owner question. They might come in and they're running iterations where they're enhancing features slowly. They're running tests with the customer, right? I know that comes from a tech background. Not everyone is at a tech background, but that's what I can. We didn't actually define the definition of safe to fail experiments, so I don't even know we're really in the innovation realm right now. Just because it's fail fast, win fast, right? Like, because that's the idea when you iterate. That's the idea of agile, right? Is that you're going so small that you can knock things out really fast and learn immediately. If it's a failure, it still links your learning.
Yeah, and I took that as the PMO supporting that in the organization, not necessarily the PMO itself. So I guess there needs to be clarity, a little bit better clarity there.
So let's take it a different direction then, because we're still on our innovation. Let's just get to AI, right?
Yeah.
AI and being layered into a PMO.
How is that going to evolve?
How's that working? Do you even
how's it going to
use
start
it?
evolving?
I mean, look, everybody probably on this LinkedIn Live is using AI in some way, shape, or form. It's just, that's where we're at in our world, right? In project management, in program and portfolio and PMO, that's not an exception. And I get asked this question a lot when I'm engaging in the industry and working with potential clients. And my stance on this is really, it's a conservative stance, but it's a clear one. If you want to use AI right now in project management to handle the mundane tasks, help you spot early warnings, keep the human beings on judgment, trust, and tough calls, use AI for the back office, safe, automated tasks. But before you do that in any organization, you have to feel good about the people that are executing within the project management space, your organizational maturity in project management, and making sure you're getting healthy and good data to pull for AI to work with. And B, also data governance. It's not, your options are use AI, which is in your organization, or you go out to a tool like ChatGPT or Perplexity, and you're running the risk of putting intellectual property into an outside source, right? So there, the data governance part of this is probably where this starts, and that's so important. And I can tell you that's not a topic of expertise for me. We can bring that guy or gal on the show, but I can tell you that my recommendation is I don't work yet with AI from a business standpoint with my clients. I don't recommend that yet. I am exploring it myself to ensure that I'm delivering it in a responsible way for my customers. So I'm sort of a pump the brakes guy a little bit here. I feel like if you're using it for automation and you're using it for repeatable tasks, just make sure you have good data governance and make sure that you have people that are executing and entering good data into the system to pull from.
So there's a few things that you brought up though, which is around disparate information. In other words, information from a PMO or project is in multiple different locations, and therefore it emphasizes the importance of a PMO. If you can learn to centralize data into a source of truth, then you might be able to leverage AI. But there's a caveat, which is AI. You talked about governance, data governance. If the organization does not value data, does not take data integrity seriously, and doesn't have ways to handle error handling, then you're going to get junk in, junk out. And the AI leverage is just going to become additional noise instead of being effective, whether it's at the front end, the back end, or whatever.
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it. I think that's a really great explanation. It's spot on. And, again, these, and there's a lot of project portfolio management tools that are building AI out right now. And I get it, right? A PlanView's got it, Monday.com, you name it. They all have, a lot of them all have components of this, and I've wrote about it. But for me, you're right. It starts with where you positioned it, Justin. Like, you have to have some governance around it, and you've got to have, focus on getting a good data source first and getting safety around that before you really start to experiment with AI from a project management lens.
So Matthew has a great kind of transition towards the concept of value that we've kind of danced around. Can you pull that one up for me?
Matthew
Geist.
Yep.
Matthew Geist.
In your experience, what are the most impactful ways a PMO can demonstrate tangible value to both project teams and executive leadership? Again, it takes us from that tactical to a strategy, as well as to signal value to executives instead of thinking of a PMO as just kind of one of those one-off things.
Right. Good question. I know we've touched on this in little ways today. So first of all, before I explain how you can actually demonstrate the value, I'm very passionate about this component. Never assume that your organization understands the value that the PMO is bringing, even if they're living in it every day. They may feel happy with the services they're getting. They may feel that it's delivering like they expect in a lot of ways, but don't assume that, especially in a larger, complex organization. So there's a difference between realizing value and recognizing value, right? So this is starting to get into how can we ensure that our organization recognizes the value, and that is an ever living, ongoing, opportunity, right? So number one is when you start to get to a place where you're getting feedback and refining your PMO and maturing it, it's almost like it gets easier every time and gets more efficient because it's a mindset. So as you continue to do that, you start to show wins in the organization, right? You maybe you do town halls, maybe you do case studies, maybe you share success stories and testimonials. Maybe you capture, feedback, positive feedback, and put that somewhere central in your organization. So you're almost, in a way, marketing your success in a PMO, the same way that you would any other business that's marketing to a customer, right? So
sounds like, Noah, you're talking about change management and the idea of also resistance management, right? So in change management, to manage that resistance, to get people on your team or on your side, to get to win them over, to get them to adopt it, right? That means including them in the process. That means pilot programs, showing them the value, showing them that it's more valuable and saves more time to actually do this versus it's gonna, because they're afraid of the cost of the change too, right? So that's what it sounds like you're talking about, is you treat PMO establishment and PMO maturity like a change management cycle.
Yeah, and you have to, absolutely, it's an ongoing component, and you have to bring your organization through that. That was a really great point, Elizabeth. You have to explain why this is happening. Why are we doing this? What are the benefits of it? What are the outcomes that you should expect? And then when you reach those outcomes, also make sure you're answering questions in between and making people feel comfortable. But then when you reach those outcomes, it's following back up in an ongoing way to say, hey, we told you this. We tell us what you're going to do it, and then tell us what you've done, right? So if you follow that mindset, that you can start to demonstrate the impact of the PMO from a project team, strategic, tangible value for project teams and executive leadership. And also, too, just by building a strategic PMO and offering strategic PMO services when the fit is right, you start to get, again, you're in the room, you're visible, right? So examples might be, you're working with the organization on portfolio management and prioritization. You're helping them align strategy in the organization. You're setting up governance and funding guardrails. You're managing benefits and helping them realize benefits. You're helping them with executive decisions.
I'm going to stop you there for a second.
Yeah.
I want to take it a different direction. Go ahead, Iggy.
Oh, I was just going to say, and Justin may want to change a different direction, but you're saying managing benefits realization and making them realize benefits realization. But I don't think that's clear or specific enough. How are we doing that? Like, if we're supposed to show our value, if we're supposed to, because the PMO's customer is the rest of the organization, right? Getting them on our side. What does that actually mean? Because nobody knows what value realization means if you're not being specific, right? Or we just need to jump in. How are we really demonstrating our value? What specifically are we doing to make people go, we want them as partners. They have to stay here. We cannot live without them.
Yeah, so that sort of backs up a little bit into, you have to get out to your organization and make sure that you build a mix of services up front that meets their needs. And so
like
when you
what?
go,
like what services? I'm gonna dig into that. I want specifics.
Yeah, so that might be portfolio support, planning and support. That will be strategic planning. That will be business realization management. So when you're talking to those customers, you don't communicate to them with what processes do you want. You want to stay away from that. You want to communicate to them and ask these questions up front. Where are your pain points in the process of standing up strategy and building out projects? Where do you feel you could use support in your strategic planning process? Talk to me about how your forecasting process is working. Do you have the visibility that you need? When you communicate that way, and then as the expert in the PMO, you go back to your PMO and you build out the processes that deliver those services, then you will get there. And then you start to tell them and demonstrate and show them that here's what we said we would do, here's what we did, and here's the outcomes, right? So hopefully that's hitting the mark.
I think I'm just going to add a little bit of layer to what you said, which is when a PMO is working for the organization and they're working for different departments, each department has its own P&L, a profit and loss statement. They also have their own objectives for their bonuses as their leadership, as well as their objectives for the year that layer up into an organizational's roadmap. And a PMO needs to understand all of these in the grand scheme of things for the organization, from a dependent perspective, from a sequence perspective, from a prioritization perspective. When you can, as a PMO, clue in into all the various different details around the KPIs, the OKRs of the different departments, and tie them back to the organization, that's where you start to demonstrate your value, that you are the liaison across different departments, as well as you're a liaison for all of the business leaders who are not in the current room.
Yeah, and that's great call, Justin. That's, knowing your audience, knowing your personas. I always say when you're doing stakeholder mapping, right, when you're trying to maybe evolve your PMO or there's a need to do so, grouping those stakeholders up into those what's important to them and engaging with them to ensure that you're covering all the components and delivering good service is definitely a good way to go, and a better way than just designing processes that you think are going to deliver a static, service, right? So having that mix that meets the needs.
Yeah, now I want to shift gears for a second, because we've talked about it a few times, that there is a discrepancy between the project managers, the PMOs, and the business stakeholders. And it gets back to an important question. What are PMO leaders constantly fixing? And what do project managers need to learn in order to remove that impediment or those frictional points between the PMO and the project managers?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, especially for this audience. So from my standpoint as a PMO leader in different organizations, to me, you have to put an emphasis, if you're leading people or project managers, right? Emphasis on business acumen. I think it was PMO Pulse that the PMI Institute puts a report out every year. And the 2025 Pulse report emphasized this topic. And I know we have a lot of audience members that probably heard about this or read it. And they went out and surveyed all these organizations, 3,000 plus organizations. And the feedback was, after all the survey and the data was gathered, that only 18% of organizations felt that their project management professionals had the right business acumen to successfully speak the language of the business and create connectivity on what the business cares about.
What does business acumen mean in this context?
So this would be learning and understanding how your business makes money, how your business prioritizes work, what's the strategy, where they're positioned in the industry, general awareness on the health of the business from an operating standpoint, financially, et cetera, right? So if you're a project manager, and this ties back to what we do and what we wish project managers maybe understood, or the feedback we get from stakeholders it doesn't matter if you're a full-time hire or if you're on a contracted project for 6 to 12 months, take the time to understand the business and the bigger picture and what it is they're trying to accomplish. Ask the right questions, make sure you understand what the strategic intent of that organization is. It's going to make you better communicator with your stakeholders. It's going to be easier to communicate with your leadership teams, and you're going to understand where the value likely lies when you're working on the projects that you have. So to me, that is the absolute most critical point that I emphasize as a PMO leader, that if you want to be a solid project manager, don't just focus on execution, focus on the relationships, the soft skills, and understanding business acumen.
Yeah, and that's exactly what Justin and I always preach, tying it to business advocacy, business impact, to gain that visibility and getting a seat at the table.
Adam is laughing.
Strategic visibility.
Oh, that's to say, Justin was laughing, and I wasn't sure if he was.
He was laughing because of where I was going. Because it's what you just said is exactly what we are constantly preaching, is to become visible, to help. You want to advocate for the business. You want to tie everything to business impact, right? You have to move beyond execution, to your exact point.
Yeah. And to keep expounding a little bit, Justin, I know you had some other questions there, but as a leader in a PMO, there's a lot of things that happen every day that maybe aren't, and understandably so, aren't on the forefront of every project manager's mind. Like, especially in organizations where resource management maybe isn't mature, we're constantly evaluating capacity versus demand, determine if we have headcount to hire. A lot of times in organizations right now, hired is slowed. So you're trying to do more with less with the headcount you have. So you have to make some trade-offs and be able to have the right skill sets on the right projects. And there's a lot of that going on in a PMO outside of, as a project manager, you're getting assigned and you're focused on your project. I think a lot of PMO leaders are doing a lot of that. And then, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to shift this a little bit. Because we've only got about 12 minutes left, and I want to ask one more question here for us to have time to, because it's something we definitely said we're going to talk about, and we haven't touched on it yet. And that is, as PMO leaders, are there hidden secrets or fixes, right, that PMO leaders can take or pass down to their project managers, right, to add additional value. So are there any
Right.
like secret tips or giveaways that project managers can start doing now, or that PMO leaders can start taking to fix a PMO, show the value, show the impact?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to go with this. I'll tell you one thing. I don't know that it's necessarily hidden, but it's something that we do that maybe isn't fully visible all the time. Is if you're operating and optimizing your PMO and you're focused on that value delivery that we've talked about in this hour, you're going to be ensuring that it's delivering value as expected. You're going to stay on top of that, and you're going to be spending a lot of time, out into what I call the streets, right? You're out there talking to sponsors and stakeholders on how your PMs are performing. You're also, you have to evaluate your PMOs, your project manager's performance, and you're doing a lot of one-on-ones and feedback. So again, that's not hidden. But if you're a project manager and you want to position yourself to support, the evolution of a PMO, I think, again, other than business acumen, it's making sure that you're an advocate for the change, right? You're on the front lines and you're an impacted stakeholder. You are in such a valuable position for the PMO, right? You're the closest functional relationship to the PMO. You're on the front lines, and the PMO leaders need that feedback. So we are all the time seeking that feedback, not only from PMs, but sponsors and stakeholders, to ensure that we're delivering value and improving continuously, right? So if you're a PM in that space, definitely focus on, if you're not an advocate or you have a concern with the direction that something's heading, speak up and have those conversations with your PMO. You are a stakeholder. You are no different than a stakeholder that is in a different part of the organization. Get that feedback to your PMO so that they can build a PMO that works for all. And so that, to me, is the most important takeaway there.
Okay, and that's fair. I think I want to take that just a little bit further, and I've got one more question after that. The question is, if you want to change the existing PMO, what steps can you take? For example, if they're all operating under a waterfall approach, now you want to go under SAFe. What recommendations do you have to help change the PMO?
From the lens of Noah or the lens of the PM?
What's your experience? Yeah, what is your experience of how to do that?
So, here's where I am with methodologies, right? So I think it's unrealistic in today's world to assume that, an organization can only function in a waterfall space. I also think it's unrealistic to think that you can iteratively develop every project as well, right? And deliver scope in incremental ways. I think hybrid's probably super popular. I know Prince is popular. To me, I think it's not necessarily about the methodology. I think the teams should work the way that they need to work to get the job done, right? And they're getting the job done with the methodologies and tools that they have. They're going to be happier, hopefully going to be delivering projects in a valuable manner. They're going to have a healthy culture. So to me, it's not necessarily about how do you change from one methodology to another. To me, it's about building a support system for your organization that embraces the freedom to use methodologies the way that they need to be used to deliver the best outcomes for your customers, right? To me, that is the mindset that you need, right? So I don't look at it as we need to change methodologies. If you go into an organization and say, this is a waterfall shop and we need to go full agile, or this is an agile shop and we need to go full waterfall, somewhere along the line, somebody's going to go, well, hold on, wait a minute. Waterfall really works for me. Hold on, wait a minute. Agile really works for me, right? So I think it's more embracing and building the capabilities to still report progress, status, and benefits. Let the teams do what they need to do in the way they need to do it.
So your answer is that the PMO doesn't prescribe a methodology, but rather enables the organization and their projects, regardless of industry, regardless of business function, whatever works in their business context works.
Yes, I think that from my stance, I would much rather operate a PMO and be a supporter of a PMO that is helping them through the process more than saying this is the methodology and putting your foot down. You're going to get resistance with that, Justin,
So if you're going with a bottoms up culture from that perspective, and I've been in that, and personally I can't stand it. But so here's the question. That's why this is why I have this question. No. I completely agree that you need to let the teams operate as they can. But when you work in a large organization, everyone does something different. It's impossible to manage. So that's why I don't like. But here's my question to you.
I have a different way to look at that, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, my question to you is, because when people work bottoms up, we still need some level of governance or standardization so we can work together as a team. And that's how you make a bottoms up culture work, right? So my question to you is,
you answered,
I knew I was going to answer your question.
I was going to
it?
counterpoint you, but you just said
Counterpoint
that.
myself. Yeah.
We're on the
So
same.
how do you? What do you do at like the most basic level when you have that bottoms up, right?
Yeah, I've encountered this, and I mean, everybody probably on this call has encountered this, right? So in my lens of this, like I feel like, and this is it's actually a good thing that it can be painful because it forces you to define, I keep saying minimum viable, but it forces you to, at the most rudimentary level, define what are the core data points that you need to capture to meet the needs of your stakeholders, right? So I know it's not just all portfolio reporting, but it really does tie back to portfolio visibility and what are the most important things that the leaders care about. Track velocity, great. Track, track your backlog, track your defects, track your scope, schedule, and cost. Those are all important components, particularly within the ecosystems of those individual projects, right? But what you do is you go into organizations and I think you explain to them the value of clear, informed decision-making and why having clean portfolio data helps your organization make better decisions and say, we need you to do these 7 things a week. Yeah. You keep doing Agile, you keep doing Waterfall, you keep doing Prince, but we're going to have a project manager plug in with you all. He's going to step in 1 time a week. It's going to happen on Friday or we'll say Thursday at 2:00. You need it by Friday at 5. Give me the core reporting elements on where you are with your project, narrative, summary, red, yellow, green, etc. Get me that information so I can get into the system of record. And then you start having portfolio visibility and governance while the teams can still do what they need to do.
Yep. Okay. And that's why I like the terminology and stuff too. Go ahead, Sarah, Justin.
Yeah.
No, I want to jump in because Daniel has a very prominent question here. And then I still want my last question. Hey, everyone. Starting here right now, the challenge I'm facing is a member of the PMO to help build a mature PMO. We are not there yet. To get there, I need a collaboration of many people, including project managers, sponsors, and leaders. How can I get them involved to help me get there without sending the message, I only bring them problems?
Yeah, so great question. And hi, Daniel. I love the question. And you're not alone. Everyone is going through this. Not everyone, but a lot of folks. So for me, I think when you go to reach out and collab with these people, there's some different approaches depending on your organization. If your organization has an appetite and they've really invested in this transformation and you just aren't there yet, talk to your organization about building sort of a practitioner team, right? Like you don't have to pull in every single member of the organization and collaborate with every single project manager or sponsor. Maybe you put a cross section together of maybe a sponsor two, maybe you have one, key stake, two or three key stakeholders, put your project managers together and get them in a room and start talking to that audience and start to talk to them about what it is that you're trying to accomplish and why you feel the organization needs to advance the maturity of the PMO. So if it was their feedback, if it was the organization's feedback, which it should be, then play that back to them and explain it in a way that matters to that group and allow them to sort of co-create. Because then what happens is as you move further down in your evolution of building your PMO, you now have champions who are close to the ground that are going to go out and advocate for you everywhere else. You can't do it alone. So that's one strategy that I've used that's been very successful in the past. You can also, ensure that if you do have to contact 50 to 60 people, try to pull them together in a town hall and be very clear and succinct and communicate the purpose and the mission and the vision of why the PMO exists and what value it's trying to bring in a way that matters to the customer, not to the PMO.
Okay, so to recap your ideas, to build a coalition, start with one, start to get an understanding of the business use case, as well as do some sort of pilot to prove out a point of concept. Okay, last question for me, and then you can wrap us up.
Yep.
Project managers have worked with PMOs since the 1950s. I think you started with this, Noah. How do project managers enter into the PMO space? What sort of skills do they need to have, and how do they start to move towards that career path?
Yeah, that's I love the question. I was hoping this would come up. So, and I've encountered this with my teams, right? So there is a desire to move into PMO or project leadership. So let's assume in this instance that the PMO is somewhat centralized and it has resources, and those resources are reporting to PMO leaders, right? So that's a great place to be if you're a project manager. And if you're not, if you're federated out into a group or department, reach out to that PMO leadership team and say, how can I get better, some exposure to what the PMO does, and start there. But the best position to be is within that lineage of the PMO. And if you're a project manager that reports into a PMO, you're going to want to continue to focus on building that business acumen that we talked about, making sure that you're understanding the business. and ask your leaders, what are some things that I can do that are outside of my role as a project manager with responsibility to your capacity, right? Don't overwhelm yourself, but pick a few tasks, whether it be, can I sit in on the forecasting process for the organization? Maybe help me understand how you evaluate our resources on our team and assign them to the right projects. Talk to me about some of the conflicts the PMO has, and maybe can I go with you to work on one of those challenges, right? So it's almost like a tour of duty. Make sure you're getting exposed to activity that's outside of project management that is focused in the PMO space, and have those conversations in your one-on-ones. Make sure you're advocating for yourself.
Okay. So thank you so much for that. Thank you, Noah, for joining us today. Thank you so much. And
happy to be here.
Noah, where can people find more about you, or if they have any other questions in the PMO space?
Yeah, thank you, Justin. Obviously, I'm on LinkedIn, and I'll drop my LinkedIn. I'll drop a comment on LinkedIn so you can find me. My website's also optigoldpmo.com. And I also have a blog, which you can find on that website, which gets deep into thought leadership. So you can connect with me 3 different ways. And then, of course, always love building relationships. So if you have questions and want to connect or have challenges you're trying to solve in your PMO, reach out. I'm happy to have a conversation. So great to meet everybody, and thanks for having me.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
All right.
Have a great weekend. Cheers.
Bye-bye.